Hello, my name is Danton Ford, and this is going to be our first lesson on communication skills for professionals. So what we're going to be looking at today are essential skills you need to be effective at communication, and we're going to look at how to have better listening skills and also questioning skills, and also how to handle conflict when you're in a meeting or when you're having a discussion with someone. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to be looking at are the essential skills you need to be effective at communication. And the first one we're going to talk about is that you need to be simple and clear when you speak. Let's look at this sentence that we see here on the board. It says, "Could you please elucidate further upon how the aforementioned budget issue is not germane to the imperative of a loan?" What exactly does this mean? It's obviously very difficult. It uses GRE, SAT vocabulary, which is exactly what you don't need when you communicate. When you communicate, you want to be simple, clear, short sentences, and easy to understand words. So this sentence, in a much easier form, would read like this. Can you explain how the budget is not related to the need for a loan? This is identical. It's the exact same meaning, but this one is much more complicated. The point here is that when you communicate, be simple, be clear. Simple words, short sentences. Let's look at another example. Salutations and well-met noble counterpart. Well, what does that mean? Simply, hello. The idea here is that, again, don't make things overly complicated. When you speak in any foreign language, or even your own language, the important thing is to be clear and to communicate your message in a way that the other person can easily understand it. Let me share one other little tip with you related to this. Many of us think that Steve Jobs was a very effective communicator. Whenever he gave a speech or whenever he gave a presentation, he was often judged to be very good at communicating and very effective. And why is that? Because Steve Jobs communicated in a very simple way. There are actually studies about his speeches and the text of his speeches. They analyzed them, and they found something interesting. His level of vocabulary is about a 5th grade elementary school level. That's it. That's a 12-year-old child in the United States. That level of vocabulary he used in most of his speeches. Secondly, they found that the average length of one of his sentences was about 10 words. So they're very short and very brief. So again, the point here is that communication is about being clear, it's about being simple, and making sure the other person can easily understand what you're saying. So let's move on to the next one. The next one is to summarize and check often, especially in meetings or any kind of discussion where you're making a decision or trying to decide something. You always want to check where you're at, what you've talked about, and what you've agreed to. So for example, here are some expressions. Let me check where we are at this point. So the idea here is what have we discussed so far? What have we talked about so far? You just want to check that periodically throughout the meeting process. Let's look at some other examples. So this is what we have agreed on so far. So if you've agreed on something, run through it again. Double check, even triple check if you have to make sure there are no misunderstandings between you and the other person. The last one is let me reconfirm what we've decided. Again, this is another way to do the same thing, but you always need to double check and reconfirm to make sure that you and the other person know exactly what you've agreed to avoid any kind of misunderstandings. A big problem that happens in meetings is that people agree just by nodding their head or saying, yes, yes, I got it, but they don't actually repeat what they heard the other person say. And you need to repeat it to make sure that you exactly understand what you've agreed to and what you have talked about and discussed. Let's move on to the next one. The idea of using we as opposed to I. So using words like we or let's as opposed to using the word I can be helpful in a meeting situation because it changes the way people feel about what you're saying. English tends to be a I, my, me language. It's very much centered around I, me, and my. But when we speak in English, it can help us if we make a slight adjustment, which is to, instead of using the word I, such as I want to discuss this issue later, try to use words like let's or we instead. For example, what if we discuss this issue later? Or why don't we discuss this issue later? Or let's discuss this issue later. Because what's happening here is it sounds like you're including the other person as a member of your team. It's not just about you. It's not your idea and what you're thinking. You're including them in the decision. So this is a helpful technique to try to build a sense of being a team with the other person. Let's consider this, or let's look at. Is also another example of how you could do this using the word let's to create a kind of a bond between you and the other person that you're talking about. Now obviously you have to use I sometimes. It's impossible not to. But if possible, instead of I, if you can use let's or we, it is preferred. All right, we're going to move on to the next thing we need to be effective in communication, which is having a positive attitude. Having a positive attitude is key for so many things in terms of being successful, solving problems, overcoming difficulties that you might be having with others. And there's a lot of research that already proves and shows that your attitude is very important to how people perceive you and what they think about you. So if your attitude is positive, generally people have a good impression of you, they will like you, and they're more willing to work with you, they're more willing to help you, and more willing to cooperate with you. So it's very important that you maintain a positive attitude. So in a meeting, if you're working with someone and there's a particular difficulty you're facing, you want to avoid saying things like, this is impossible, we're not going to be able to fix this, there's no solution here. You want to avoid statements like that. Rather, you want to encourage others to continue working on whatever problem you might be having. Saying things like, let's keep thinking about what we can do here. Let's continue working on this. Let's look at it again tomorrow. The idea is that you always want to think that there is a solution, and there is always a solution to every problem. It's just a matter of time. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it takes shorter. So try to encourage others to, keep working on it, keep thinking about it, maybe sleep on it, wait until the next day, look at it again, look at it tomorrow, look at it next week. The idea is to encourage that you don't give up whatever issue you might be facing. So that brings us to the end of our first lesson today. So the first thing we talked about is you want to be simple and clear when you communicate. That's very key and it's very important. The second thing we looked at is summarizing. Always reconfirming and summarizing what you've discussed and what you've talked about to make sure there are no misunderstandings and to make sure that you and the other person know exactly what you've decided on and what you've agreed on. We also talked about trying to reduce the use of the word I. Try to use I less. Rather, use expressions that involve let's or we, because that connects you with the other person or the other group of people that you're working with. So you want to try to do that as well. And finally, make sure you maintain a positive attitude. Try to continue to encourage action to solve whatever problems you might be facing. So in our next lesson, we're going to be looking at how to be more effective in our listening skills and also how to be more effective in terms of questioning. So that's it for this lesson, and I'll see you for the next lesson. Bye.